Good space time, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast, your source for educational insights into the Web3 universe and your connection hub to discovering those that contribute to building the decentralized world. Today, we are joined by Tom Trowbridge from Fluence. We touch upon the importance of technology, the state of the internet, and decentralization. We discuss Amazon, network infrastructure, and DePIN. Finally, we talk about crowdsourcing, history of decentralized applications, and developers. If you enjoy our podcast, please share this episode to your favorite social platform to help us spread Web3 values across the universe.
Web3 is effectively the only tool that we have to counter the dominance of several of the top Web2 companies whose dominance I think is large and will only continue to grow. The most scaled decentralized application, I think, in history existed before Bitcoin, which is, effectively file sharing through BitTorrent and obviously Napster. It's in every government's DNA to try to control and try to surveil and try to see things, right? That power likes to get more power. People who are on Amazon right now are subject to their 80-page term of service agreement, which basically allows them to turn you off for any reason whenever they want.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast. Today, I have Tom with me, the co-founder of Fluence, and much more than that, to be honest. But Tom, hi. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Great. Listen, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Finally, I remember, I think it was in Berlin Blockchain Week, I just was saying before we started to record, that I approached you, and I think I had to cancel, and you had to cancel, and it took 6 months, but finally we did it.
Yeah, we met at our Berlin DePIN Day, which was, I think, at this point a while ago. It's crazy, but we did 8 of those DePIN days in 2024, and Berlin was a pretty big one. So definitely great that those relationships continue to bear fruit even now, whatever 6-8 months later.
And a small kudos to you straight away. I don't do it very often off the beginning, I must say, but a small kudos. It was my first event in 2.5 years, my first major event. And I was there for a week and a half in Berlin, and I must say that, I don't think there was any other interesting events apart from what you did.
Well, listen, that's super nice. We've gotten feedback that the DePIN Day events are solid, and the Berlin was good, but the one we did in Bangkok, the one we did in Singapore, one around Token 2049, one around DevCon, were also really good, and were even, I think, easier to manage than the Berlin one. So we've got a big one coming up in Hong Kong, and also in early February, and then we have a one in East Denver as well. So the DePIN Day events continue, and I think we built them into something pretty interesting. So I hope people take your advice seriously, and if you're in town, please attend them.
Yeah, guys and girls, please, whoever's listening to this, also check out the show notes, and you will find links to those, because we do add everything Tom or me going to mention to the show note links. So check it out. My personal advice, great event. But let's go back to you, Tom. I kind of started with a compliment there, but usually I don't. Usually I put the guest on a spotlight and say, can you please, and I'm going to ask you right now, can you please, for myself, for the listeners, talk a little bit about yourself, about your background Web3 story. How did you get into Web3? How did you get into DePIN? Anything you want people to know about you, and of course, anything else you want to add?
Well, happy to. Listen, my journey started in 2016 when I discovered Hedera Hashgraph. And so I first invested in the parent company called Swirlds, got to know Manson Lehman, and they asked me to come on board and basically help found the public ledger, which we later called Hashgraph. Well, I later called Hedera. And so when I joined, there was just a white paper, and there was a company called Swirlds, right? And so we then created Hedera. We hired a team, raised a bunch of money, launched the network, built the governing council, and really built up from a standing start a global L1. And that was really got going in 2017, mid-17, I think is when that really kicked off, kind of early 17 when I got involved, I believe. And then or maybe it was late 17, and then frantically ran around building that in 18, launched a token in 19, and that now has as a top 17 cryptocurrency right now. HBAR, I think it is 16, 17. It's gotten renewed interest because of the potential of this administration, the Trump administration in the U.S., to potentially eliminate taxes on U.S.-based crypto. So then it's one of the few, which is, based in the U.S. It's also kind of interestingly run by two Texas-based ex-military, Republicans. And so if this isn't the environment for that, I'm not sure what is. So I think that kind of the price action is probably deserved, and I think we'll see more of it. But that was my introduction. And then when I left there at 19, one of the investors in Hedera introduced me to the Fluence team and said, listen, these are the most technical founders we know, and you'd be a great complement and great addition to that team. And so as soon as my non-compete was up with Hedera, and this is not a competing project, but just to be kind of, respectful of it, I joined them as a co-founder and CEO. And Fluence is unlike Hedera, which is an L1, basically like a Solana competitor, but faster and cheaper, et cetera. Fluence is a decentralized compute platform. And so it does everything that all the work of the internet right now happens on CPUs. Everything you do that's not on your phone or your computer, that's every app in the cloud, is running on compute. And almost all that compute, this, by the way, includes a lot of blockchain nodes, a lot of consensus service. Like, all this stuff is happening usually at Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. And that is the huge problem for decentralization. It brings huge risks. And so decentralized compute is hard. We've got decentralized payments with, Ethereum, with Bitcoin, with stable coins, et cetera. And we have decentralized storage with Arweave, with Filecoin, with others. We don't yet have a scale decentralized compute. And that's what Fluence is working on solving. And that has been a big challenge, but we have made terrific progress towards it. We launched our token in February. We've gotten the network live. We have CPUs up and running. We've announced our first customer. So everything is in progress. So anyway, that's both the story and the pitch and understands and sound bites of the first, I'll say the two main projects I've been involved with.
I'm gonna dig probably Fluence a lot more. Well, decentralized computing for sure a bit more. But before I get to that, I wanted to dig your story, if you don't mind, a little bit. But this is part of the podcast, and it's part of the question. I try to talk about the guests. Why? Like, nobody wakes up and says, doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter if they're in school, doesn't matter if they work for a great successful company or if they're an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter. You don't wake up and you say, well, today I'm going to join a blockchain project. No, it doesn't happen like that. So people are driven by something. For example, I know you have some telecom background. I can understand how that could have, went from one to another, but I don't want to assume. I do want to know what attracted you to this industry. Why did you decide to join it?
Well, I guess, there's a couple of different things, but I have wanted to do something entrepreneurial for a very long time, and was always looking for the right projects to do. And so I kind of tried to, itch that kind of desire or fulfill that desire by starting things within bigger companies, but that was never really sufficient. And so meeting the Hedera team, I sort of saw, listen, this is a team with a great technology that seems ready to go. And I am particularly suited to add value to it because I have a lot of institutional relationships, and I can add value to these incredibly smart, incredibly technical, but ex-military, effectively more or less academics. And so there's a lot of complement that I could bring to that and value to bring to that, which is particularly for Hedera, which was focused on institutions. So it was like, here's a great way to marry my skill set and relationships and really complement something pretty powerful. And on top of that, I think that the decentralized technology is super important just for humanity. And if you even take a step back, my view is that the internet has become more and more centralized, and it's not anybody in particular's fault. It's just the nature of the economics of a global platform where as you get bigger, you make more money, you can spend more on marketing, you attract more customers, you crowd out the small guys, you attract more customers, you make more money. It's sort of a cycle, right? And so that's why you have these huge companies dominating, and that's a dangerous position to be in for a number of reasons. And it takes a combination, and Web3 is effectively the only tool that we have to counter the dominance of several, of the top Web2 companies, whose dominance I think is large and will only continue to grow. And so that to me was a very worthwhile project and kind of endeavor to spend time and effort on. And I think that it's obviously interesting to a lot of people. It's interesting to the market. These are also global projects, global problems, global solutions. So the global nature of it, the scale, is also really important. It's a huge problem. It's a huge solution. And so I think that's also interesting. But I'm very worried about the creep of kind of oligopolies and what that means effectively for freedom around the world.
There is it's a lot of topics, and I'm gonna try to be a little bit devil's advocate. So please don't mind that. But before I go there, so two kind of a little bit devil advocate-ish questions. One, I love to ask founders, and I'm personally founder myself, so I like to ask it myself as well sometimes. But do you think we, like, hand on your heart, right now, if you kind of like think about our time in blockchain or your personal career in blockchain and the dedication we think as founders, as entrepreneurs, as builders that we contribute, do you think that there is one person today out there that has benefited from what we build? And I don't mean you personally or me, myself personally, we as an industry, like a person who is not in the blockchain. I'm not meaning a DeFi user. I mean a farmer out there somewhere on an island or on a, I don't know, whatever country, and that has found blockchain. I was like, wow, that has changed my life. And I don't mean with DeFi.
I'm trying to think of what you mean by has changed their life. In terms of doing commerce in a different way.
Let me dig it a little bit. So, as usually, it's a very common thing, and I actually am a believer in that. I think that we are, at least trying to make a change. We are offering an alternative to the system that exists, but a lot of the time, I find that, in blockchain, we tend to a little bit overestimate what our solutions are going to bring to people. A lot of the time over the last 10 or 12 years that I've been in this industry, it's very hard for me sometimes to talk to people who have not heard about blockchain and explain to them why they need the blockchain. Because sometimes they don't need it, but I'm trying to sell them ideas, that I feel sometimes, do they even need it? Is it going to help them? So my question is to founders, do you think that the technology you have been building so far has changed somebody's life for the better, to be more efficient, for the easier, in terms of what of what it's supposed to do? It's kind of like that, if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, listen, I get it. And I mean, I'd say blockchain and crypto have changed lots of people's lives, but let me phrase it differently, which I think is the bar I would hold. Has it made people freer? Has it made, right? That to me is what we really want to do. And I have to think about that for a second, because I don't think I think it has that, it certainly continues to have that potential. But, and actually, let me say, as I think about this real time, I think sort of Gen 1-ish you've got smart contracts, you've got privacy, and you said you kind of cheated by excluding DeFi, but that's kind of the most, built out. That's like the most built out ecosystem in this space. And so I think stable coins, the ability to pay quickly, easily, globally, that certainly has. Bitcoin has changed people's lives without a doubt, having easy global access to value and moving it around. So those can I point to other particular L1s as having changed people's lives? Or, like for example, look at Arweave, where all the Apple Daily publications from Hong Kong were uploaded, will be there forever. So now those are forever uploaded despite being shut down and banned by China, right? That's valuable. Can I point to any individual whose life that's changed? I'm not sure, but I know that's valuable and that's good to have and glad it exists. And that'd be hard. I mean, that's possible without blockchain, but blockchain makes that cheap and kind of secure and in perpetuity. So that's an example of it, I suppose. I think with Fluence, having decentralized compute is very close to doing that. I think I would say, ask me this question in a year when our network is more scaled and we actually have a lot of uses being built on top of it. And I think I'll be able to give you a precise answer and examples of where Fluence has done that. And the way I'd say it is that even having an alternative changes behaviors. And so people who are on Amazon right now are subject to their 80-page term of service agreement, which basically allows them to turn you off for any reason whenever they want, right? You know that. And so they can do that. And as governments become more and more intertwined with these companies, that will happen. That potential continues to happen. Now, that doesn't mean they use it, but it means everyone on it is aware of it. Now, the more there's an alternative to those companies, the more they have to be careful about their use of that, which means the people on it are aware that that's less of a threat, right? So even having an alternative just helps the world and the ecosystem overall, even if not everybody, even if, half doesn't move off it, right? It's just that alternative itself is helpful. So anyway, that doesn't help answer your question in particular, but I think you sort of see where I'm going with it.
I think it does. I think it answers it perfectly because I'm sorry to kind of interrupt, but feel free to add. But I think what you said about alternatives is, I think, the perfect, in my opinion. That's how I see it, to be honest. I wanted your opinion. I said it's a bit devil's advocate-ish. I'm actually exactly of the same opinion that it's about the alternative. It's about giving something instead of saying, hey, whatever you're doing is bad, but we don't know how to solve it. So what blockchain does is exactly that. It's offering the alternative. Over the last 10 years, I noticed that the more I want to peel somebody, the less about blockchain I need to talk to them. All I need to do is talk about the modern system. And then the question is, what is the alternative? I don't know what is the alternative. Well, they don't know what is the alternative. And here we can come and say, hey, Web3 is the alternative. So I definitely agree with what you say 100%. Sorry to cut you out there a little bit.
No, that I agree. And I think it's incumbent on us to just be building that alternative and make it as viable and strong as possible.
The second devil's advocate-ish part was, and I'm coming from a point of a self-hosted validator, somebody that uses Starlinks and solar panels to run networks and stuff like that. So I have a lot of guests on my show, especially lately, from proof-of-work networks. And we had Bitcoin, Monero, a couple of other networks, and also a few people from analytical tools such as Dune Analytics and stuff. And I noticed that more and more of them highlight, it's not like we didn't notice that this industry became a surveillance kind of mechanism, but I noticed how much they highlight it. And, we talk about freedom with you just before. And, the question is, it looks that it becoming a bit scary to the point of I had, people refuse to come on the show because they don't want to talk about specific things, or validators saying, I'm not going to go and validate this network because, well, I don't know how the SEC or whatever is going to look at that network and evaluate my work. So what do you think about all this industry heading in that direction? How do we change it if we need to?
Heading in which direction?
Surveillance, a lot more surveillance and a lot more less privacy.
Yeah, listen, it is certainly a tough one, and you see clear examples of governments really going after the privacy components of privacy, oriented applications for sure. And I think that it's in every government's DNA to try to control and try to surveil and try to see things, right? That power likes to get more power. So that I think that's hard to change. The way, though, I would phrase it is that even surveillance in this space is still better than surveillance and control in the Web 2 space. And so, right, like your Amazon purchases are available to Amazon and the government can just share it in a second, everything on Facebook, boom, right? So when we talk about increasing surveillance in this space, that is totally true. I don't think that's going away, but you have to, we're coming from a place where we expect zero. And that's great. And that's a bit of that's an idealistic, goal to achieve. I think it's very difficult to achieve that. Really, it's maybe possible, but if instead you come from the anonymity that you still have for doing different things here, it's still far in excess of anything in Web 2, and certainly in excess of where Web 2 is going, which is increasingly, surveilled and controlled. And the obvious massive point for everyone to be focused on here is obviously central bank digital currency space, where, that is kind of how you phrase it, but like the pinnacle or the of surveillance / control by states, and the scariest thing to be a part of. And I think our whole world will be that much worse off if our technology ends up being used for countrywide or whatever, central bank digital currencies that end up with credit scores and everything else. And social credit scores, et cetera, right? Like that is the real utter disaster. And so now those aren't really decentralized, right? So it wouldn't really be a decentralized payment system. And so that is not exactly the use of this technology. It'd just be a digital currency which is used for it. So you could split hairs and say it's actually not the use of what we're building, and that's very fair. But regardless, I think that's the thing I'm most worried about, versus anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scary, sometimes hearing what people who are experts in this, like especially analytics, that come to the show, and the things they say sometimes are like, whoa, put me aback. Look, as I thought it was not as bad, and then they come and they're like, yeah, but we can just do this, and I was like, whoa. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about, not a little bit, let's talk about DePIN, and decentralized physical infrastructure. I'm going to ask you for a very silly thing to start with. Can you please really LE5 what is DePIN? What is decentralized physical infrastructure?
Oh, that's how I DePIN podcast. I actually start most of my episodes asking the host to define it, because it is, I think it is a term which is people find interesting and they think it's hot. And so every app now is trying to say that. And I'll make this just even bigger point. Masari came out with a DePIN report, and I don't know if you know Hasib from Dragonfly, but he tweeted that all of the revenue, or not all, but a big chunk of the revenue attributed to DePIN comes from a particular application, which has nothing to do with DePIN whatsoever, in his opinion, and which I would agree with as well. So what is DePIN? DePIN, my definition is basically crowdsourced physical infrastructure put together in a network that is secured and incented by crypto economics. And I would add one thing: it's physical infrastructure that's providing a useful service in a network secured and incented by crypto economics. And so, right, but a lot of just regular applications are kind of trying to grab the DePIN banner when they're just an application. And they're an app, and that's great. There are plenty of apps. That's fabulous. Go have a super successful scaled app. Great, but that's not DePIN.
So what you're basically trying to highlight here, because I like this, is the word decentralized. Is basically you're saying, hey, you can have physical infrastructure, but it doesn't have, it might not be decentralized, then it's not DePIN. That's it.
No, it's not even that. It's that the infrastructure has to be used to provide a service, right? So if my phone is, I'll make an example. If my phone is, doing calculations for someone else, or my phone is, or my computer is providing excess bandwidth, or my CPU is doing something, or I have an antenna on my roof doing something, or I have a camera in my car, right? Or my server in my house or a data center, all that stuff works. What doesn't work is like just an app on my phone that, is, calling that is a, I don't know, a currency conversion, or is a phone calling app, right? That's just something I download and I use it, right? So that's, you're supposed to be selling and monetizing some level of your infrastructure for other people to use. That's the point. And it doesn't have to. By the way, it doesn't even have to be consumer grade infrastructure. It can be enterprise grade. And at Fluence, just as an example, we only use enterprise grade, like the highest level T4 data centers for our class 4 data centers for our infrastructure. So it's not a network of thousands of CPUs. And so but to us, and I think the real decentralization benchmark is not the number of nodes, of participants. It's much simpler. It's the fact that no one or small number of parties control it, right? So it's almost like a negative definition rather than a positive one. You don't have to have X number. It's more that you just can't be controlled by one or two entities. That's it. And that's a very different bar than what a lot of people have, where they think, oh, are you decentralized enough? And as long as you can switch with like very low friction, then you have a handful of parties that are spread out different ways. I think you're decentralized compared to any centralized provider.
You're coming to a very interesting topic that I like. Like I said, I'm gonna make a small statement and then ask you a question of what you think about it. So, in my experience as somebody who is building decentralized infrastructure, like off-the-grid infrastructure, with that decentralized infrastructure to adoption have not been a helpful thing. Like, it's interesting that the more complex the infrastructure we try to provide and build as an operator, as a validator, as an entity, I've noticed that networks don't care about it. I noticed that, very little networks that we come to and say, hey, we can work, off the grid. We have the capability, or we have a unique location or whatever, or we're not in a data center, or we use enterprise grade. I've noticed that nobody cares about it. So what I'm trying to say is it important that operators provide, decentralized infrastructure for networks, and how important it is to do that?
I have two answers to that. So first, as far as I can tell, every decentralized product at scale has moved to more institutional hardware. Bitcoin being the first. People started mining Bitcoin at homes in basements. Now, where is it? Purpose-built data centers run by publicly traded companies. Then look at like a Filecoin. Started off people storing files in their homes. Now, where is it? There are Filecoin miners that raise money to just create data centers to only store Filecoin, right? Similar with Arweave. And so no one requested that. The market just took care of it because the economies of scale benefited groups that could invest and scale that infrastructure. You get economies of scale buying, economies of scale running, economies of scale operating, economies of scale servicing, right? It just makes sense. And so I think that will happen with what I would call, if we back up, we think about DePIN, at least with the digital DePIN or digital services, because you just will get better quality and better scale. And then the next thing is that it also depends on what your service is and how reliable, how much your service is dependent on reliability. And if you're doing storage or you're doing compute, people want to be able to depend on that. And so we very much need to be able to articulate credibly how secure, stable that infrastructure is, because that is we're competing against centralized companies who are very stable. And so that's who you're competing with. You need to have it. If you have a different offering with a different customer base that you're providing something brand new no one's ever used before, it may not matter as much. But if you're trying to displace incumbents or take business from existing players, you have to have a superior offering and at least meet the minimums across other sort of attributes of that offering.
It's also a big, I think a lot of operators, at least again, my experience here has been that when you try to enter the DePIN kind of world, first of all, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to start building. There is a lot of manuals on the internet. Well, there is. I mean, you can dig them, but not for blockchain infrastructure, for sure not. And I'm curious whether you think that would you encourage today people at home to start up their own nodes, or would you say, hey, again, depending on what the service and the computation and whatever you want to offer, you have to think about it, or would you discourage even maybe people from starting nodes at home today?
So I want to make that question a little more precise. So, in terms of mining, I think that's probably makes less and less sense, but it's very project specific. There probably are projects out there that are early, for which there is not a huge community, which if you believe the token has real value down the road, might make sense to do that. You also could, by the way, just buy the token, but that to me is, I'm sure they exist. But what I say more importantly is there's a number of DePIN projects out there where I think buying and deploying the infrastructure can still make sense. And I just did a podcast recently with a group called Wingbits, which is creating a new decentralized airplane tracking network. That was real news to me. And right, they have a very specific grid, how many they need to have up there. To me, that's still interesting. I'm buying a couple of those to deploy those. I think that will make sense. So, right, so I think there are still plenty of projects out there where buying and deploying that infrastructure makes sense. That's very different, however, from saying you should buy a CPU and start mining Bitcoin. No, that is not going to be productive.
Yeah, completely. Of course, I think the use cases play one of the biggest, probably roles in it, right? But I want to get back actually to something you mentioned. We talked about Reveneu, and by the way, you mentioned an app which was not a DePIN app, but was written in the report to get most of the revenue. Can you name the app, or you remember it? Curious.
The app. Give me 1 second here. I even know because I retweeted Hasib's comment on it, because I found it's such a pet peeve of mine. I'm so aware of it, but I'm trying to find it right now. I can't. Sorry.
Don't worry. We will link the report in the show notes too, so everybody can read about it. But let's talk a little bit about Reveneu. It's an interesting also topic, in my opinion. Whenever we look at talking economics or whatever, any way you want to see it, Reveneu, especially in my opinion, since 2021, in the last cycle, not talking the first two cycles were a bit different, or the first three cycles. The last one, Reveneu started to play a much more important role. And people realized that networks don't really have revenue apart from fees, and that inflation is not really revenue, and so on and so forth. So what do you think about Reveneu, and can DePIN as an industry maybe provide a new type of revenue for blockchain networks?
Yes, and I will actually take that farther. So I actually think, I have a presentation where I say DePIN isn't a meme, and frankly, maybe it should be a meme, but I think that almost all of crypto effectively are memes, to your point, because Reveneu is so limited and nothing is based on revenue. It's just based on what people think and where they think it's going, right? And that's why volatility is so high, and everything's a meme. DePIN is the only subsector, and I guess you could look at decentralized exchanges are the exception to that, right? They have revenue and their fees there, so that's a real use case with Reveneu. So that's an exception. But then whether it's tied to the token is a whole nother thing, right? So we have to let's leave that out for a second. But DePIN is very revenue generative, and I think this year is going to be the year of real revenue generated in DePIN, which I think has two components, two attributes. One is it will attract a new class of investors to the subsector, investors who are traditional investors who actually can understand this subsector because they get the use case, and they also can see revenue come in. And there is a link to the token mainly through buy and burn components where they can actually forecast revenue, forecast the demand for the token, and really figure out what appropriate valuations are. And so what I love about the buy burn is that you can own a token and not one other person needs to find out about it and buy that token, because if you're right and the product generates revenue and they do 90% buy burn as a number do, then no one other person has to buy that token because that project is buying and burning those tokens every day. And I think we will see the power of that token economic model start to kick in 25. It started in 24 minorly in some projects, but I think mid 25 and maybe it's 26, I don't know, but this kind of area. And I think you see DePIN then potentially have a different sort of profile from the rest of the industry. It doesn't mean, by the way, that it becomes worth more, because memes continue to have huge power and aren't going away. But I think it means that it becomes much more of a stable area with a sort of different, potentially different investor base.
There is a lot of opinions, and I actually started to a little bit also agree with it. The perfect meme coin is Bitcoin, like it's there. It's just, but I do agree with what Morad said recently, that meme coins don't lie to you. They sell you hope in case for the price to go up, whether altcoins trying to sell technology, but in reality, they're selling the token. So I kind of tend to, it's hard to argue with that statement. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it's hard to argue with it because like like being again 10 years here, I also noticed that we are so fragmented as an industry. Like everybody's in their own ecosystem, everybody's in their own bag. You look at meme tokens, these guys don't care about what technology they're using. They don't care about the tribalism. They've solved the issue we cannot solve for like 10, 15 years with hope. And yeah, I think that, in that way, I don't know, what do you think about it? So what's your thoughts?
Oh, it's complex, but I guess I'd say the other benefit of the meme coin is that, you're if you do it, the sort of true meme coins, you're in there right away. People are betting and winning and losing together. And it's not like there's a real, I think, frustration with early private buyers, with venture funds kind of, dumping on retail and hyping up projects, et cetera. So I think it's partly that concept of hope, but I think it's more of a community view that the community can do this, the community can profit, the community can lose, but it's doing it together. It's not subject to kind of being manipulated by institutions or by, other kind of more moneyed forces, I guess.
Sorry about the meme thing in the middle, but let's get back to Reveneu. I was just curious what you think, because you did mention it, and it's a big topic these days. Of course, we're recording, by the way, in January for the listeners. So, it's a big topic. But anyways, but back to Reveneu for a second. Do you think, but in blockchain, right, or in DePIN specifically, can there be other examples of actually real revenue generated by a decentralized ledger apart from fees?
Oh, but sorry. Outside of DePIN or including DePIN?
Including DePIN.
Oh yeah, I mean for sure. I mean, without a doubt. So let's go through some examples here. But Helium, right? They are doing, it's effectively decentralized. First, it was a network, an IoT network that didn't catch the traction they wanted. So kind of building a new world. So they've moved to decentralized wireless offload. So carriers pay them money, dollars, to offload data onto a decentralized crowdsourced network of hotspots effectively. That revenue goes into Helium. And what does Helium do? It takes that money, it buys the token, burns the token, right? That's real revenue, real burning happen every day. Same thing with GeoNet. They do a decentralized RTK network. That's effectively like a GPS system, right? But, far more precise, like down to 3 centimeters. So you can, have robots mowing lawns or farm machines, doing stuff completely automated. And this is live operating now. They generate real revenue. 90% of that revenue goes in, buys a token, burns it. So the answer is, those are just a couple of them. There's Wingbits, which is revenue from tracking airplanes. There's Spexy, which is doing drone mapping of the world as well from drones. I mean, there's a huge number of these things that are out there actually selling to real world customers. Look at Hivemapper, right? It's mapping roads, and they're being paid by customers for this data that they then use to burn the token. So that this is a huge number of applications in the DePIN sector that are generating revenue from a wide variety of clients that don't care about blockchain, don't care about tokens, may not even be aware of the tokens behind it. They just want this service. And the service is superior or equal to the centralized services, but is usually much, much cheaper. And so that is why there's a clear value proposition. And the beneficiaries should be the token holders, and a bunch of the token holders should be the infrastructure providers who are paid in tokens. And so that's how DePIN works. And that's why I love this sector, because it's easiest to understand. It's generating revenue across a large number of subsectors all over the world.
Could I kind of say it in the following way? It's kind of going back to your L5 about what DePIN is, providing a service. It was very important, you said, right? It has to have a service. So in this case, our revenue is generated, well, could be any service. So apart from fees, we just have an additional service which provides us the revenue, right? So that's basically what DePIN introduces. Apart from giving fees like a normal L1 generates, doesn't have any other revenue, DePIN also can provide a service and generate a payment from that service on top of the fees, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would phrase it differently slightly, is that DePIN, there are no fees. There's just a service people are paying for because they're not L1s. They operate on top of L1s. They're actually the fee payers to the L1.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of skipped it. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I guess there's going to be some crazy L1 DePIN project one day, right? It has to be that. But we'll see. We'll get to that. By the way, we talk about DePIN, and I didn't ask you the most. I mean, I guess you're going to get asked that a lot, but I still want to ask you, as somebody who is really, well, in the middle of all of that, more than all of us are, how close are we actually to fully decentralizing, computing platforms and services right now? How and what are the challenges that we are still as an industry cannot tackle today?
Listen, I think that question sounds simple, but it's actually pretty complex, because compute isn't one thing. And so where do we stand with decentralized compute? Well, right now, you can have a decentralized server on Fluence if you want it tomorrow. And if you don't like it, you can turn it off, and you can rent one from somebody else. And by the way, you can probably do it in Akash. You can probably do it in a couple of others as well. So on the one hand, we're there. It exists. On the other hand, if you want a decentralized compute service, like a cloud equivalent service with all of the bells and whistles and capabilities of the menu of options you can get from one of the top hyperscaler clouds, we are not there, and that is going to take a long time. All right, and so you can rent decentralized. You can run compute decentralized right now by renting a server from anybody. Fine, great. And then we at Fluence just added virtual machines. So now you can have pieces of a server, not just a server, right? And so then where do we go from there? Then you go to serverless, right? So you keep moving up the chain and moving up the stack, and then you add, okay, what about this service? What about that service? What about this service, right? So we keep adding services on top over time until eventually we get to parity with cloud. We are not there. That will take time. The one thing we have working for us, though, particularly at Fluence, is that the only way I think you can credibly compete with any of these large companies, Google, Amazon, et cetera, is if you are able to incent and harness the power and kind of ingenuity of the global developer network. And so that is what can happen. And what is going to happen at Fluence is just like it happened with Linux, which effectively outcompeted Microsoft, which had billions of dollars and a massive head lead on Linux. Linux had the global developer community tinkering away, working, building what became a superior product. And it's not just, again, not one product, right? Linux is a whole list, a whole sheet of a whole kind of stack of things that work together well. And on Fluence, we think that having verified services where some small part of that revenue flows back to the people that created those services will help drive incentives for the whole community to work to build the most interesting, compelling, stable, useful services. And that is how I think we can accelerate the building and deployment of services versus, to compete with the clouds. If we were trying to build it all internally, no shot. But if we set up the right incentive mechanisms, then I think we really have a potential chance to do that. And that's the only chance to do it, by the way.
You are right. It brings a topic that probably I could talk about for the next 2 or 3 hours for sure. But I still want to ask at least one question in that direction. It sounds like it might be a little bit of a marketing question, but please put it on top of what you just said, because it makes it a lot more interesting. It's not really a marketing question. It's a question about, we are what right now, 2025, right? So we are however many years, 16 years almost, right, into it, right? Let's say from 2009, let's calculate from the beginning. And, we mentioned tribalism, and, it's an interesting point. You're saying basically I can bring the community together by finding the same, by sharing the same interest, engineering. Though nobody has so far managed to do that. We trying to unite communities, but it looks like, Linux did something you do still have Apple users, hardcore Apple users, or hardcore Windows users who will not use Linux. But, it's slightly different from our case, I guess. But my question is, how on earth, and what are you guys in Fluence doing to do that, to achieve that? Do you unite developers across blockchain? Because, to me, it's been a puzzle, real puzzle.
So here's the point, I think, where the disconnect is. I'm not talking about developers across blockchain. I'm talking about developers, period. And as you're no doubt aware, developers in blockchain are a little tiny bit of developers globally and developers across, right? You take your Solidity developers, which is the most common language, right, in blockchain. And I can't remember the numbers, but that's what, 5% of the Java, right, developer number, I don't know, something in that ballpark, right? Even less. Yeah, even less, like tiny. So the point is, there's certainly, and so all we need to be successful is for developers to know that if they build something that's used, there will be some stablecoin payment that flows to whatever wallet they have that accepts stablecoins, right? This is not an Ethereum tribe. This is not an Avalanche. This is not a Hedera. There's not any of that, right? This is a completely separate thing. And it's important to mention this, like Fluence in particular, we are not an L1. And I want to take a step back here and remember here, our compute happens off chain. We use crypto for incentives, for validation, for rewards, right, for security. That's critical, but we're not an L1. And remember, the most scaled decentralized application, I think, in history existed before Bitcoin, which is, effectively file sharing through BitTorrent and obviously Napster. So decentralized applications happened way before Bitcoin. And I think in our community, there is a sort of a understanding of view, which I think is wrong, that decentralized equals blockchain. That's not true. There are technologies that pre-existed blockchain. Now, they didn't talk about transmission of value, and I'm not trying to diminish the innovation of Bitcoin in a blockchain whatsoever. But we came at this problem to figure out, how do we get decentralized compute? And then where does blockchain fit in to make it most effective and secure? And that's how it works. This is an off-chain thing, but that also, because off-chain, opens up the developer community for all these cloud services, which have nothing to do with blockchain whatsoever and don't have to at all.
And, just to add to your words, about the misconception of the world decentralized, I think if you go into like economical history, one of the most ironic thing is that the Medici family, one of the biggest families that brought out banking into Europe and made it banking we kind of know, not today, but it put the roots to it, was thanks to their decentralized networking system that was really there. Like it's written about, like centuries ago. The word decentralization, has it's weird why we sometimes mystify things, I guess, maybe to add, like, I don't know, more curiosity to ourselves. But I actually want to ask you, with that in mind, maybe to wrap it up, kind of, you've done so many DePIN days already, and you probably see a lot of small projects, which in my opinion are important, not just for the industry but for the world itself. DePIN projects come and you hear about them. What would be your, like, in a couple of sentences? I know it's very difficult to summarize like that, but maybe one to do and one not to do. If there's a founder right now that's sitting and listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to start a DePIN project, or I have an idea how to track, I don't know, ironing boards or chips in McDonald's badges, I don't know, whatever people want to track. What's something one to do and one not to do from what you have already seen with the amount of DePIN projects you went through? Sorry to kind of like this, but
what I'd say to that is you must, my view is it's all about the token. And this may sound not the right thing to say depending on where you are, but I really think it's true. And the project must exist in order to drive token value. And the more success the project has, the more traction, the more the token needs, the more that has to have a direct link to the token. And if it doesn't, and you're in an interesting space, someone else is going to figure out a better token economic model that probably will outcompete you, because the token will have more value, they will have more revenue, they will be able to get more customers, hire more people, etc. So I think the technology attracts a lot of really intelligent people, but I also think that tokens sound interesting, but I think the first generation often of DePIN projects didn't sort of had a token, but it was either way too complex or not even particularly linked to revenue. I think the next generation, which I see a lot of right now, have a lot of this buy burn. Super simple. This generates money, 90% used to buy and burn the token. Done. Right? So now it's so clear. This generates revenue. It's the token. There'll be real demand for the token. That to me is really important, to have a very simple, very defined token economic model. And I think that is, and if you get that right, that will drive a lot of value. And then the next thing I say also is, in DePIN in particular, you have to be prepared to do a lot of business development, a lot of sales. And I think that in the previous generation, people created L1s and thought everyone's going to come to them and do a bunch of airdrops in DeFi, and people will farm the token and do great. And that's certainly a way to do it. But particularly in DePIN, these services are sold. They are not bought. You have to be out there selling. And so either you are that seller as the CEO and founder, or you have to find a great team to go do it. But pretty much no matter what, as a founder or CEO, you have to be able to be confident that you're going to be the one to secure the first customers. Because if it's not you, you're going to have a tough time finding someone else to take your place to do it.
That's actually a very great answer. And I wish I was asked it earlier to dig it a little bit, but we'll leave it for next time. Tom, I have three questions for you to kind of finish our conversation there. I call them the Blitz. Feel free to answer, not necessarily fast, but slower if you wish, and think about them. And they have nothing to do with crypto. This is just like to resume the hour and take us out of that. Very quick questions. So first one, name please either a book or a movie or a song that has positive influence on you.
I guess the book I would say, which is interesting to me, which had a positive influence, is The Unincorporated Man, science fiction movie about a guy who wakes up thousands of years in the future where everybody is tokenized at birth and what that means. And so it's kind of even before the word tokenized exists, right? It's not even new, the word token, but that's effectively what it is. And so he isn't tokenized. And so what he isn't owned by anybody else. And so what that means. So that book was, I think, a super interesting kind of perception of what the tokenized world the extreme tokenized world could be. This was written even before, I think it came out right around Bitcoin came out even before. There's nothing to do with Bitcoin, but yet it sort of envisions that world a little bit.
Second one motivational thing that keeps Tom getting out, so that you can share, of course, publicly, that keeps Tom getting out of bed every day, building DePIN, focusing on decentralized ledgers and everything we talked about.
I mean, listen, I just want this to work. I want Fluence to scale. I want it to be well known. I want this to be a real thing, and that takes effort and work, and I'm excited to do it. Like I know we can, and I know I can add value and really be a part of that. So that I just want that to happen. And by the way, even if it's not Fluence that ultimately is, I think what we're doing at Fluence is going to help the whole sector and the whole industry. So I know even that if there's other better projects that come out, what we're doing is going to help that whole ecosystem grow as well, which I'm very supportive of. So I think the work we're doing is important even beyond Fluence's individual success.
About offering an alternative, right? I like that answer. Last one, a bit weird one. Not that the previous ones were not, but this is the weirdest one, but the last one, I promise. Dead or alive, real or made up, could be a friend, a character, a developer, a movie personage, doesn't matter. A personage, I don't believe in gurus, and we try to talk not about gurus. A personage that when you feel stuck and down, especially in terms of like work, and you cannot progress, you kind of think about that persona or personage, and it helps you to progress.
No, it's an interesting one, but I don't really. It's a great one, but I'm not sure. I don't have an answer off the top of my head for that. Like, I don't know who do I call back? Who do I go to for strength? Is almost what you're effectively talking about, right? Like,
yep,
that's what that is, and it's a great concept. And I'm trying to think of other. There's a lot of examples of people out there who've had succeeded with really difficult times and backgrounds. I guess what I'd say, and this is going to sound interesting, but I'll be careful how I phrase this. But there's a guy I know who is hardworking, is successful. I knew him for a year before finding out that he was incredibly short, like incredibly short. And he has overcome everything, right? Think of the disadvantages of being incredibly short. And he's got a normal wife, he's got kid, he flies all over the world, he's in Africa, he's everywhere, building multiple businesses, right?
I understand very well.
So that's the example I use, is that, he has to rent cars, has to all this stuff, right? With a really challenging, setup. And so that is, I think, a really, that's something that's sort of at least aware of. That is, I think, kind of an important example, I think, for me and for everybody.
I totally, by the way, agree. I always draw inspirational strength from people who are, like you said, their setups are socially different and they don't care. They just go on with whatever they have and prove to all of us that, they can do even better. And you're like, wow, and here is me sitting there suffering that, I cannot pick my nose or whatever, So I totally understand what you're saying completely. Thank you for that answer. Tom, I want to thank you in general for coming on, finding the time, not being annoyed with the questions and providing all the answers. And for everybody else, I want to thank you for tuning in. And once again, Tom, this is going to be a goodbye just for the listeners. For all the listeners, goodbye, and see you next week.
Great. Well, listen, thanks so much. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Very fun.
Thanks, Tom. Bye. This content was created by the Citizen Web3 Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating on citizenweb3.com/staking and help us create more educational content.